All right.
Yep.
So I guess I'll start. So good afternoon. My name's Kate Whelan. I'm an EngSci 2T3, and my research this summer has been in designing a handbook to create psychological safety in virtual student design teams. So our high-level objective is to create both a student and instructor-facing handbook that will not only support student teams, but also help them create effective online collaboration spaces through best practices and recommendations. Our research started as a way to better understand how the transition to virtual higher education due to COVID-19 has affected teamwork in the past 2 semesters, but will also continue affecting teamwork this fall, specifically in first-year design courses. We started with a literature review on design courses, trust building, and virtual teams to get a better understanding of their makeup, as well as moving on to creating a survey for undergraduate students within the faculty on their experiences with teaming in the past 2 semesters. And finally, we had many conversations with subject matter experts, including instructors and professionals with Troost iLead to gain from their experience with teaming. So as we explored all the influences and impacts on the student learning experience in undergraduate studies, 3 main areas emerged. So there was an academic sphere, a social sphere, and a personal sphere. And teamwork seemed to sit at the intersection of these spheres, as you can see in the Venn diagram in column 1. So in teams, you have to share many things with your teammates. You share grades, which would fall into the academic. You share friends, which would fall into the social sphere. And you share and create shared values, which would fall into the personal sphere. So to be able to engage and be an effective team member, a student must be comfortable sharing these parts of their identity and their lives. And so psychological safety is necessary for students to be willing to take risks to share these parts of themselves. So what is psychological safety? Our definition is that it's one's emotional ability to express oneself in a virtual community now, without fear of negative consequences in relation to well-being and self-image and status. So as you can see in the middle of the web diagram in column 2, that psychological safety actually sits at the center of all the influences on one's ability to engage in virtual teaming. This is due to the new explicitness of our online medium. So instead of gesturing to one of my diagrams, as I would have done in person, I now have to verbally refer you to them so that we're all on the same page, which is something that we've lost in now virtual exchanges. So just to talk through the diagram a little, we have trust that both directly influences the willingness to engage, but also influences it through psychological safety. We have stereotype, threat, and identity, and psychological safety in its own little triangle, as well as brave spaces and psychological safety kind of going hand in hand in how they both allow for risk taking with identity. And you have the willingness to engage, influencing a team's performance and a team's learning. So one of our main findings has been that being responsive, answering messages, demonstrates accountability to your team members, which reinforces trust, which leads to a better teaming experience. You can see that in the linear graph in column 2, right on the bottom. We've seen this both in our survey data and in trust building literature. So about our survey, we surveyed 197 undergraduate engineering students on their experiences with teaming within the past 2 semesters. We found that students reported better teaming experiences when they either had a strong relational connection to each other or a strong connection to the project itself. You can see in the second quote that many students talked about messaging and how it relates to accountability, but this specific team had that psychological safety in their back pocket that they had already built in person, so they could hold each other accountable with the problems they were having around not messaging back. So some of the implications that we've seen are that you have to actively build psychological safety in both teams and in classes because they will transfer over to each other. You need to promote psychological safety, and to do that, you need to promote responsiveness amongst team members and have students get to know each other outside of their teams and project work, not only to develop friendships online, but also to have a connection to each other, which will provide them with a better experience. Our handbook will be coming out within the next 2 weeks. So if you're interested in some of our best practices and recommendations, I encourage you to check that out. And finally, I'd like to acknowledge and thank the Engineering Instructional Innovation Program for sponsoring and supporting this research this summer. I'll now open the floor to questions.
Thank you, Kate. And all right, Professor Dario Carroll.
Yes. Okay. Sorry, I was just trying to find the clapping icon there as well. Okay. So, Kate, thank you very much for that presentation. This is quite interesting and hits home because I'm going to be teaching a course with a lab component this fall, and it's going to be virtual. And one of the concerns I have is how, you know, because they're going to be broken up in teams, how they can, you know, interact properly with each other, because they may not have gotten to know each other enough. And that really comes that's really my question, because you said that one of the key things to foster the psychological safety so that they can feel comfortable in these virtual, I'll call them lab groups for in my application, that they need to develop those concepts or that comfort outside the project. So how do you suggest that can be done? And I'll make it very specific. I'm going to have a robotics lab. Mm-hmm. You know, we're going to be putting students in teams of at least 2. How can I foster some of this outside of the labs so that they can begin to feel comfortable with each other?
One of our main findings is that games actually really help build those skills, because there's less stress than just having to sit there and have a conversation. There's a mediating factor between you. So there's a bunch of games that we will recommend. My partner and my favorite game is called Keep Talking and No One Explodes, which is a bomb defusing game, which establishes communication patterns and makes you get to know each other pretty quickly, and you build the trust there. But you can also play simpler games. I know iLead is trying to introduce like a quick activity at the beginning of each one of their workshops with student leaders. So I'm sure they have plenty as well. But also just from the start, getting them to talk to each other, whether that's in breakout rooms, and making sure they're meeting a bunch of students in a very quick manner. So if they have like a 5-minute social talk at the beginning of lab and they're just kicked out into breakout rooms, hoping that they will talk to each other, because I think you can rely slightly on the fact that students do want a social aspect in their learning right now, because there is so much isolation. But yeah, there will be more on that within the handbook coming out in 2 weeks.
Well, thank you. And a quick follow-up, where can I get the handbook?
It will be distributed through iLead, and instructors will get a copy through them, I believe.
Okay, thank you very much.
No worries, thank you.
I hope I have a chance to ask one quick question, because I'm also interested in the subject, obviously, and this is a very urgent subject and unknown territory. Catherine, thank you for taking this challenge. The act of responsiveness to messages. Can you clarify exactly what that means? Is it the time when the response is done, or is it the effort that is put in the response, or any other matter?
Each team will have a different established communication pattern, so it will vary, but it means all of those things. It means if someone is just giving a thumbs up to a message and not doing what they're told, it means they're not responding at all. It means they're taking a really long time to respond. So we suggest that teams develop their own shared communication charter in a way, and use that to hold each other accountable. So say that you're going to be online from this hour to this hour and you're willing to answer messages then, but I will not be answering messages at 10 o'clock tonight, but I'll message you back tomorrow. And that way you're going to get out of some of those problems of gray areas in being responsive. And as soon as someone stops being responsive completely, there's a way to go get support from someone else outside of the team. I don't know if that answers your question.
In your upcoming handbook, you will be establishing a protocol about how to make these communications?
We will be encouraging teams to do it themselves, and it will be varied depending on the course. But yes, in some ways, it will give guidances on how to set up your team structure a little more than in past years because of the explicitness of the new medium.
I look forward to finding this handbook then.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Kate. And we look forward to seeing that booklet come out on the ILEAD website.